It was the clarion call to a new way of doing news.
Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, up.
It's now 10 o'clock and time for the news from ITN.
British Airways and some unions join forces to fly the flag again. It'll be a white Easter holiday for some. Good evening. The management and unions of British Airways are linking together to help to get the airline flying again by next Tuesday, despite the engineers' dispute.
This is Thames from London. We now go over to Reginald Bosanquet and Sandy Gall at ITN.
Good evening. A select committee has made another strong attack on a minister. This time it's Mr. Dennis Howell.
This is Thames from London. The time is 10 o'clock. At ITN, Sandy Gall and Anna Ford.
Fireman, new offer to try and stop the strike. And why was this 18th century house bulldozed? Good evening. Firemen's leaders and their local authority employers are still locked in talks aimed at averting the one-day strikes due to start on Wednesday.
This is TVS. Now we join Selina Scott and Martin Lewis at ITN for national and international news. Time check, it's 10 o'clock.
Miners vote not to strike. And launch today the new Channel 4. Good evening. The miners, as expected, have voted not to strike and to accept their pay offer against the advice of their president, Arthur Scargill.
This is Thames from London. In 30 minutes, our local bulletin. First, the national news at the studios of ITN. It's 10 o'clock.
60 dead in Lebanon as Arafat fights for his life. The bone marrow boy who may die because there's no money. Good evening. The PLO leader, Yasser Arafat, and his followers are tonight fighting for their lives in their last base near Tripoli in northern Lebanon.
This is Thames from London. The time now, 10 o'clock.
Mrs. Thatcher's pound is at its lowest. 40 years on, a wreath for the bridge that was too far. Good evening. The pound closed tonight in London at its lowest ever since Mrs. Thatcher took office, and indeed ever since there was a pound and a dollar.
This is Thames from London.
The engineers and the TUC, it's a split. And now they've found her, will they raise her? Good evening. The Trades Union Congress heard tonight that it faces the biggest division in its history.
Parliament will break recess to discuss the Gulf, and the Guinness Three move quickly to an open prison. Good evening. Parliament is being recalled next week to hold an emergency two-day debate on the crisis in the Gulf. Both the Commons and the Lords will meet.
This is Thames Television. The time is 10 o'clock.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
The Chancellor cuts interest rates in a modest mini-budget. And the Duchess of York tells us why she's keeping a low profile. Good evening. Another cut in interest rates and a squeeze on public sector pay.
The time now is 10 o'clock, and we join Trevor MacDonald at ITN for the latest world news.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
Clinton talks tough, Serbs offer a concession tonight. And how this computer disk can bring pornography into your home. Good evening. The Yugoslav government announced within the last few hours that it's cutting all aid to the Bosnian Serbs.
From London, you're watching Carlton. Now today's national and international news from ITN.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
The Lords defeat the government again over rail privatisation. And in disgrace and out of Europe, United fans arrested in Turkey. Good evening. The government's desperately trying tonight to get its rail privatisation bill back on track after it was ambushed in the Lords.
Tomorrow on Central at 8:30.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
A bar owner's grief, a province in despair. And Agassi's back, but where's the fun in tennis today? Good evening. The misery of mindless killing in Northern Ireland was etched on the face of a Loughin Island bar owner today. Hugh O'Toole returned to his bar and broke down when he was shown where 6 of his regulars had been shot dead.
Now on Central, it's a little after 10 o'clock. Time for the news from ITN.
From ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
Gas chief says, I'm worth £1,000 a day. And the crowded holiday jet that could only turn right. Good evening. The British Gas Chief Executive Cedric Brown appeared before a committee of MPs today to defend his salary of £475,000 a year.
It's 5 minutes past 10. This is Central. It's time for the news from ITN.
ITN News at 10 with Trevor MacDonald.
Terrorism rocks Middle America. At least 19 die in Oklahoma. And how a British guerrilla is beating the Japanese at their own game. Good evening. A terrorist bomb in a government office block shattered Oklahoma City in America today and stunned the country.
You're watching Carlton, where now it's over to ITN.
Edinburgh and London, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald and Julia Somerville.
The voters decide on Scotland's Day of Destiny. And a hefty cut coming for the household gas bill. Good evening from Edinburgh, where the polls have just closed in the referendum which would radically change the way Scotland is run.
For over 31 years now, our colleagues at ITN have brought us Big Ben's famous chimes, and now it's my duty to announce the final News at 10.
From ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
Clinton breaks his long silence about Monica Lewinsky, turning back the clock to bid farewell to News at 10. Good evening. President Bill Clinton broke his long public silence about Monica Lewinsky tonight to say he wished her well.
On the ITV Nightly News, Prince Charles's comments on the Falklands cause a storm in Argentina. Plus news of tonight's football. Burning anger in Argentina over the Prince's Falklands comments. All the Premiership action, how Leeds close the gap on the leaders.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News, with Dermot Murnaghan.
Good evening. There was a storm of protest in Argentina today about what the Prince of Wales said there about the Falklands. After the break, calls for tighter gun controls tonight after the horror of the Texas church massacre. Join me after the break.
We've a profile of the Sheffield band Def Leppard in half an hour. Now it's news time. First with ITN.
Texas church massacre, new calls for gun controls. And a return to form at last for Newcastle tonight in Europe.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News, with Dermot Murnaghan.
Good evening. The American Attorney General Janet Reno said tonight that Americans had to look hard at the gun control issue after the 6th mass shooting since April.
This is Carlton with the news.
Farmers' fury as the mass slaughter begins. And Liverpool continue the English triumph in Europe.
From ITN, the ITV News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
Good evening. A ruthless new slaughter policy.
Government at war as Short accuses Blair of being reckless. And death of a hero as Barry Sheen dies of cancer.
He was a household name that people still think he racist.
The ITV News at 10 with John Suchet.
Good evening. Last night she called the Prime Minister reckless over Iraq, but tonight Claire Short is still in her job, still one of Tony Blair's ministers.
First signs of war. Has the attack already begun? Anti-war protests turn angry across Britain.
The ITV News at 9, with Trevor MacDonald in Kuwait and John Suchet in London.
Good evening from Kuwait City, where tonight, 4 hours ahead of the deadline set by President Bush, there are signs that war on Iraq could have already begun.
All that to come after the news.
Tony Martin free and speaking out for the first time. Thanks for the memories. The world pays tribute to Bob Hope.
I thank you so much.
ITV News at 10 with John Souchet.
Good evening. For 4 years, Tony Martin has been surrounded by controversy. Today, the day of his release, he's caught up in a new one.
This is ITV1. Now, Granada News and the national news with Trevor MacDonald.
Election battle lines are drawn. Letwin and Brown clash over spending. But if their sums do add up, how many jobs in the public service will have to go? Also tonight, Tutu's attack on Blair. The Iraq war was immoral and the PM should apologize. And the dangerous alcohol craze that's about to sweep Britain.
And in the northwest, a mother lays her 3 young daughters to rest. She tried in vain to save the girls from a fire at the home in Lancashire a week ago.
Good evening. A key battleground for the next election was mapped out today. How much of our taxes should go on public services?
Just how many sex offenders are teaching in our classrooms? Ruth Kelly admits she doesn't know. Parents are furious.
We do not want those individuals in our schools putting our children at risk.
The Education Secretary is under growing pressure tonight after admitting several registered sex offenders have been cleared to work in schools. Also tonight, dicing with death, how some people in Turkey are hiding their chickens to beat the cull.
And I'll be explaining why the ram in this poster ran into trouble for making beer too sexy.
And in the northwest, back to the scene of a nightmare. The survivor of Britain's worst cycling accident talks of his devastation.
Good evening. Revealed, the deputy head convicted today for sexually abusing a 14-year-old girl. The government was warned 2 years ago that Nigel Jackson was a danger to children. But no one took any notice. The extraordinary story of yet another teacher free to abuse. Our investigation shows that for months the Department of Education didn't even reply to a letter warning that Jackson should be blacklisted. As pressure mounts on Ruth Kelly, another shocking failure in a system that's meant to protect our children. Also tonight, freezing to death, we report from beyond the snow line where Pakistan's quake victims are dying every day. And saved by the World Cup, what the FA said today about Sven and the fake shake.
And in the northwest, mourning his son, a father's painstaking final farewell for the teenager who died in Britain's worst cycling tragedy.
Good evening.
After the ITV News, it's 10:30.
Tony Blair says he believes America will act to tackle climate change. He tells me it's the most serious threat we face, but the mood is changing across the globe. Tonight, new hope that a climate deal with the world's major polluters is finally on the way.
There is a changing mood around the world. For the first time, I think in America they're prepared to act. And so I'm more optimistic than I was, but we've got to work at it.
We're live in Antarctica, where scientists believe climate change is already happening, and we report on how rising sea levels are already having a dramatic effect thousands of miles away. The first climate change refugees, the islanders forced to leave their homes for good. And homeowners beware, fears of another hike in mortgage rates as inflation hits an 11-year high.
And in the northwest, the man who was told he'd won the Canadian lottery by con men who took £80,000.
Good evening from Antarctica, the first frontier in the battle against climate change. And in a first for television news, we're broadcasting live from here, surrounded by ice. Back from the political dead, Hillary Clinton's victory against the odds throws the race for the White House wide open.
Let's give America the kind of comeback that New Hampshire has just given me.
The former First Lady is back on track after her surprise win in New Hampshire. So she's neck and neck with Obama tonight in what promises to be a fight to the finish. The two rivals are now preparing for the bigger primary battles that lie ahead. I've been speaking to the man leading the Clinton campaign, also tonight. Feeling the squeeze as M&S struggle, a warning of just how tough it's getting on the high street. And don't play it again, Sam. Allardyce is sacked after just 8 months at Newcastle. Good evening. It certainly is for Hillary Clinton. This time last night, even she thought she'd lost the New Hampshire primary, and with it perhaps her chance of becoming American president.
The man Diana wanted to marry, an exclusive interview.
Oh no, she's not here to defend whatever I say. But whatever I would say is what honestly I believe.
Hasnat Khan has remained silent about his affair with the princess for 10 years. Tonight he speaks to us. As Paul Burrell tells the inquest, he spoke to a priest about a private wedding.
Also on news at 10. Beaten to death in her home tonight, the charity hostel for ex-offenders at the centre of a murder inquiry for the second time. And no more bad behaviour. Fabio Capello tells us England's players must clean up their act.
Good evening. News at 10 is back tonight with an exclusive interview with Hasnat Khan.
Coming up after news at 10.
£4 million, the ransom demanded tonight by Somali pirates as their British hostages reveal the strain of their ordeal.
Thank you very much. Please give our love especially to Paul's father. We tell him we miss him very much.
For the second day running, News at 10 has managed to speak to the Chandlers, this time to Rachel, who broke down as she said she and her husband Paul were bearing up.
Also on the programme, sacked tonight, the government drugs advisor who said ecstasy was less harmful than alcohol. And saving Sophie, cash pours in for the little girl who needs £500,000 for cancer treatment in America.
Good evening. Within the last hour, it's emerged that pirates holding a British couple captive in Somalia have demanded a ransom of more than £4 million. The ultimate sacrifice of a soldier who saved countless lives, killed by a Taliban bomb days before he was due to see his wife and his son.
This is the ITV News at 10 with Mark Austin and Julie Etchingham.
Staff Sergeant Olaf Schmidt spoke to ITV News before leaving for Afghanistan. He died defusing one more bomb before coming home. Also tonight, breeding terror inside the most lawless country on earth and why it could pose the greatest threat to Britain's safety. New arrival, Wayne Rooney leaves hospital tonight after becoming a dad.
Good evening. The widow of a soldier killed by a Taliban bomb paid tribute to the bravery of her husband tonight. But she said the pain of loss is overwhelming.
On the ITV News at 10, the full scale of Jimmy Savile's abuse revealed. There were hundreds of victims, but opportunities to stop him were missed.
The government taught him to kill. Now he's using his skills to get revenge. The Specialist is our film in 35 minutes after the ITV News.
Predatory and pervasive, the appalling scale and nature of Savile's sex abuse revealed. But never charged, never prosecuted. He was the monster everyone knew who hid in plain sight.
I think we were all taken in. You could say he groomed a nation.
This is the ITV News at 10 with Alistair Stewart and Natasha Kaplinsky.
The Crown Prosecutor and the police apologise for years of inaction and say it is a watershed. For Savile's victims, the relief of being believed at last. Also on the programme, job shock in manufacturing as Honda sack 800 in the face of falling demand across Europe. And Kate says her first portrait is amazing, others are less generous.
It's the kind of image, in fact, that you might see in a high street photographer's window.
Good evening. The hideous Jekyll and Hyde nature of Jimmy Savile's life was confirmed today in reports by the police and the NSPCC.
Black magic or something more sinister, Agatha Christie's Marple tomorrow at 8. But now, the ITV News at 10.
The biggest shake-up of pensions in a generation. But the government is accused of a short-term fix with long-term pain for many.
Also tonight, HMV, the latest high street name to call in the administrators. And Britain slides into winter. The big freeze that could last a fortnight brings snow and ice to much of Britain.
This is ITV News at 10 with Mark Austin and Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. The changes to the state pension set out today by the government will hit more people than it will help, according to independent economists.
Here with all the latest headlines now, it's the ITV News at 10.
Over 50 dead and dozens missing as catastrophic flooding hits Germany. After torrential rain, the sheer force of water swept lives and homes away at horrifying speed. The worst natural disaster to hit the country in decades, ringing alarm bells over climate change. Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg and France have also been hit, and weather forecasters are predicting there is yet more rain on the way. Tonight, Angela Merkel has spoken of her grief for those lost. Also on News at 10 tonight. Welcome to the pingdemic. 500,000 told to self-isolate as COVID numbers surge and businesses count the cost. No lost souls in Kenya. The brilliant new green enterprise turning flip-flops into art.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. Untamed, unchecked and unprecedented floods in western Germany have claimed dozens of lives.